Welcome back to The Glow Life. I'm your host, Maria Marlowe, and today we're talking all about reversing acne holistically with naturopathic doctor and co-founder of Attune Functional Medicine Clinic, Dr. Ashley Biscoe. I found Dr. Ashley Biscoe on YouTube, actually. She was incredibly informative and her videos were amazing. So I said I have to have her on the podcast. She's incredibly knowledgeable. And so in this episode, we are going to focus specifically on acne, but just know that in her practice, she works on a wide range of disorders and complex health challenges, including other skin disorders, digestive issues, autoimmunity, and even unexplained symptoms. She has a drug-free approach to medicine and really likes to help the body heal itself by removing the things that are hindering its healing and adding in the things that help its healing. And so her approach is really refreshing, and I think you'll find this episode really interesting and helpful. Before we jump into the episode, a quick note that this podcast is sponsored by the Clear Skin Plan, which is my 90-day meal plan and program to help reverse acne holistically from within. It helps you figure out what your underlying root causes of acne are and address them through dietary and lifestyle changes. There are also over 100 delicious skin clearing recipes in the back that you can mix and match. There are meal plans and shopping lists if you want to have a done-for-you plan, or you can kind of go at your own pace. You can also eat out. You're not stuck to just eating from the plan. It will really give you all of the tools you need to clear your skin from within naturally. It's science-backed, dermatologist-approved, and doctor-recommended. To get it, head to mariamarlowe.com/clear-skin-plan. Dr. Bisco, thanks for being here.
It's a pleasure.
So let's talk about acne.
Yes.
I think there's a lot of misconceptions about acne, and we tend to think of it as a topical issue, but it goes much deeper than that. So to kick it off, what do you think are some of the misconceptions about acne?
Yes. Well, number one, I think that a lot of people believe it's a normal phenomenon, right? Everybody goes through it during adolescence, during their teen years. And of course, it is very common, but I always tell my patients, just because something is common doesn't mean it's normal or healthy. You know, there are cultures and areas around the world where acne simply doesn't exist. They don't have the same inflammatory foods in their diet. They're not exposed to the same stressors or toxins. So I think that's the first misconception, is that we should expect to go through it as a normal part of our development. Another myth is that acne is simply a dermatology condition. You know, it manifests in the skin, but what we know is that this is really an inflammatory and endocrine type of disorder. And people who have acne are actually at a greater risk, and they're more likely to have systemic illnesses. For example, women with acne in their early adolescence are very likely to also have endometriosis. People with acne are more likely to have diabetes and heart disease because there are some common exposures, some common inflammatory pathways and risk factors that co-occur with acne. This topic is really dear to my heart because it was actually kind of the springboard for me getting into the work that I do. I developed acne at a very young age. I was probably about 9 or 10 when I started getting pustules all over my forehead. And in hindsight, I now realize that my childhood diet was not healthy. It was a standard American diet. My mom worked very hard. She was a busy, single mom. So I ate a lot of, TV dinners and things like that, but that was normal. Everyone did that. My mom is wonderful. No fault to her, but there were a lot of food exposures going on in my life. And in hindsight, I believe the house that I grew up in had mold. We had a flat roof. And I can remember as a kid when it rained, like putting buckets. And then there was a time when our living room flooded. And it was a beautiful house and a great area, but the design and the architecture of it. So I could go down the whole environmental medicine rabbit hole right there. But suffice it to say, I tried all of the topical creams. I tried the tried and true oxy pads, the benzoyl peroxide, all of that. And we were really looking for a cream, a topical. And again, that's another mistake that a lot of people make, is looking for the right product, the right facial, the right cream, instead of looking deeper. And so fast forward several years later, the acne wasn't going away. It was just kind of a common occurrence throughout my teen years. And there was one summer in particular, I believe it was the end of my first year of undergraduate in college. And I went to the dermatologist, and he prescribed corticosteroids and antibiotics. And I had never tried that type of pharmacological intervention before, but I was excited to get clear skin. So I was willing to do anything. And after a few months, my skin did clear up. It was absolutely flawless. And then something interesting happened, Maria. The acne came back, and it came back with a vengeance. It was worse than it had ever been. Instead of having, small pustules, dispersed throughout my face, it became deep and cystic and painful. It developed on my neck, on my chest, and on my back. And I remember there was a period of time where I was wearing turtlenecks in the summertime because I was so embarrassed. I had cysts all over my neck. So I just had to cover myself. I was wearing thick coats of makeup. That's another myth. Can makeup cause acne? Yes, but there are plenty of people who wear makeup and don't have acne. So that tells you right there that there's more going on. And so that led me down the rabbit hole of saying, why did this happen? What is going on? What can I do about it? I've always had kind of a curious research nature. So I turned to Dr. Google. At the time, I didn't know what a naturopathic doctor was. All I know is that I went to different doctors and nobody could tell me what was wrong. Also during this time, it wasn't just the cystic acne at this point. I developed a whole cascade of new symptoms. So I was having daily headaches, chronic fatigue, yeast infections, you name it. It felt like my body was falling apart. And I was like 19, 20, and then it continued for several years. And so that planted a seed in my mind. Out of curiosity, I thought, how can I feel like crap and yet there's nothing wrong with me? And so I started doing some investigation on my own. I learned about the fungal connection to acne, and it made perfect sense because I had taken a boatload of antibiotics. And the rest is history. I found, even as a layperson, I found a system, a method, the principles that helped to clear up my skin naturally. And I became so inspired. I was like, I want to help other people be healthy. And I learned so many other things on that journey. And so then I learned about naturopathic medicine, and I left my career in public health to go to naturopathic medical school. So that was a long story, but I wanted to share that.
No, that's an amazing story. You're glowing, by the way. We're on video here, and your skin is so perfect. And your story reminds me a lot of my own story, because I had something similar happen where I started developing acne right after my 16th birthday, and tried all the things, all the topicals, then went to the dermatologist, tried all the things, the topical creams, the birth control, the antibiotics. Eventually they prescribed me Accutane, and that I filled the prescription, but I read the side effects before I was about to take it. One of which was severe depression that could lead to suicide. And I was like, probably not a good idea to be taking this. And because I was depressed at the time because of my skin. So I didn't end up taking it. And, like you, for the long time, there was just no answers. And it wasn't until I discovered this whole concept of food as medicine that I started to make changes to my diet. And then that is what cleared up my skin. It was nothing topical. It was all internal.
Exactly. It's so true. And, when I went through my healing journey, I had moved away from my home state of Oklahoma, and I had undergone this transformation. And I remember when I saw my mom coming home from college one year, she said, "Wow, your skin looks great. What are you using on it?" And I said, "Nothing. I changed my diet."
Exactly.
And, my father was a medical doctor. He was an eye surgeon. And so in my family, it was all pharma. It was, this is the strongest and the best. We need to go this route. We need a drug. And that has never really resonated with me. I think there's always been something inside of me that has known that the body is self-healing and self-correcting. And I've always been very curious. And so I believe there's always a reason that something is happening. One of the things I love about naturopathic philosophy is that our goal is not to treat disease, it's to create health. It's to set the foundation for the natural forces of healing that are already in us to manifest, to direct and orchestrate that natural process. So our job is to play detective, figure out what those barriers are, remove them, and then use as much as possible low force interventions, natural interventions, things that support and enhance that natural and divinely guided self-healing process rather than just suppressing symptoms. There is a time and a place for that, but I'm such an advocate of finding the deeper root cause of what's happening because, again, it's not just about your skin health. This is about your long-term health and the prevention of more catastrophic things happening to you down the road, like cancer and heart disease, infertility. All of those are linked with your dermatological health.
So I think there's two really important things that you brought up. One, and this is something I say all the time, acne is a blessing in disguise.
Yes, I love that.
Because it's alerting you to some sort of internal inflammation and imbalance. And we know chronic inflammation is the root cause of a whole wide array of chronic illness and diseases. And some people are not so lucky, right? Some people have that internal inflammation and it's not showing up on their skin necessarily. So they don't know until they get a much worse diagnosis down the line. So really acne, I know in the moment it doesn't seem like it, but it's really a blessing in disguise because it's going to prompt you to dig a little bit deeper, be that detective and figure out what's going on.
That's so true. I love that.
Yeah. And then the second thing I really liked what you said was how when we're trying to solve a problem, we're letting our body really do the work. So we're not relying on some outside magical drug to cure us or heal us. We're taking away the things that are inhibiting our body's own healing process. We're giving ourselves the nutrients that our body needs to do its job. And we're letting the body heal from within.
Yes, I love that. And, it's funny. I always use the analogy of like a simple cut, right? So many people don't realize that we are meant to heal. We see visually healing on the outside. Like if I cut my hand, I don't have to do anything to it. I don't even really have to put an ointment or a Band-Aid on it. As long as the wound margins are fairly close together, they're going to grow, new granulation tissue is going to come. I don't have to like look at my hand and think about it healing. It just does it. That is the divine force of nature, the self-healing, intelligent process that's already here. And one of my mentors in naturopathic school, she always said, health is our default state of being. We know that because most of us are mostly healthy most of the time. And I'm not saying that there's not a lot of chronic disease and sickness out there, but even people who are sick and suffering, for the most part, right? They can think a thought, they can type something, right? We're mostly functional because the normal direction is towards health. We call that the vis, or the vital force, in naturopathic medicine. And again, our job is to remove those obstacles that are blocking that flow of health. And so just like this cut on my hand is going to heal, I don't have to think about it. The inside of our body is meant to be self-corrected, self-healing. And that's another important point I want to bring up. We can't get clear skin fast enough. Everybody wants fast results. And sometimes we do see a really fast clearing and improvement of the skin when you remove the inflammatory foods, you get the toxins out of your life, all of that. But I have seen in some of my patients that have had more either chronically longstanding or more severe cases of acne, it can take a while. And that's because that self-healing process, it's ordered, it's intelligent. And so your body is going to prioritize the most important functions first. It heals from the inside out. So it can take a while to see the full manifestation of what you're looking for. During my own journey, it was probably 3 months before I saw a significant, and it was bad. I mean, I would sometimes wake up with blood on my pillow. That's how bad the cystic lesions had become. It was horrible. But it took a while to really turn the corner. And then it took more finessing with my diet and learning, important triggers for myself before I really saw dramatic results, and then got to a point where I just never was breaking out again. You can turn acne on or off. That's an important piece to know. Same thing with genes. You can turn genes on or off with environmental triggers, stressors, exposures, food. So we have more control than we realize. We don't have to be helpless victims.
Exactly. And that's something I learned pretty early on too, because I remember when I learned of this whole food as medicine concept,
Yes.
I was like, okay, I've tried everything else. Like, let me try this. Let me see if it works,
Yeah.
very skeptical about it. And then lo and behold, in about 3 months, that's when my skin had really cleared. And I was like, wow, this is a miracle. My skin is cleared. Now let me go back to eating my pizza and McDonald's and all the standard American diet I was eating
Yes.
before. And then that's when it really clicked, because I ate those foods and it was like overnight, my skin was angry again and breaking out. And so when I was able to see that in the mirror, like, okay, when I eat my dark leafy greens and wild salmon and all this healthy stuff, my skin, everything looks clear and the bumps start to go down. But when I eat my quote unquote favorite foods at the time, that's when my skin looks really angry and unhappy and breaks out.
Yes.
So it's a little bit of a journey, I think, in the beginning, but once you wrap your head around that, you can turn the acne on and off. It's like, wow.
You really can. Absolutely. And I love that you brought up, your favorite foods, because I want people to know you can change your taste buds. The rule of thumb is like, we don't eat what we like what we eat. And so if you shift your diet, and I've been there, I was the queen of sugar growing up. I used to have like a little side hustle baking business. Like I sugar was my life. And that, again, that's another thing that set the stage for my acne development once I hit puberty and the hormones. It's the perfect storm. But dietary changes can be gradual. I try to hold my patient's hand when we go through that journey together. But the more committed you can be early on, especially, when the body is in a state of inflammation, you need to be a little bit more aggressive. I don't believe that eating should be stressful. I don't believe in orthorexia, like being perfect. That's also not healthy at all. But when you shift your focus, instead of saying, I can't eat X, Y, or Z, and instead choose to say, I am so excited that I have had this revelation of information. Now I know how to support my body. I get to eat this, and this, and it's going to support my healing. Like, that's a radical shift. And over time, you will learn to adapt your taste buds. People don't realize that a lot of what we think is a normal part of our diet is specifically designed to be hyper palatable, hyper craveable. And so we've gotten to a place where it's not enough for food to simply taste good. It has to be delicious. It has to be, something that you crave and come back for. But what's wrong with just simple flavors that taste good? So, and I'm not saying that we can never indulge a little bit, but that was an important shift in my life that I had to make, is realizing that simple, healthy food can taste good, and that can be enough.
Exactly. And that is the incredible thing. Our taste buds do shift.
Yes.
I was also a sugar queen, and I can remember after I had started weaning myself off and going more towards natural sweets like fruits and etc., that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
When I went back to the sugary stuff, it was actually too sweet. My taste buds had changed. And now that super refined sugar processed stuff was too sweet. So it definitely, it takes a little bit of time, but you can train your taste buds to like and even crave healthy food.
Yes, yes. And I want to talk about sugar for a minute, because that is such an important element to this whole acne picture. And the reason for that, it's manyfold. Number one is sugar really dysregulates the immune system. And since acne is an inflammatory condition, any dysregulation or overstimulation of the immune system is going to contribute to that. The other problem with sugar and carbohydrates that radically or quickly spike blood sugar, we call those high glycemic foods, fruit juice, white bread, things like that. You're going to produce a significant amount of insulin. And insulin is a major, major driver of acne. It has an effect on the skin and the hair follicles. Insulin is a growth factor. It's an anabolic type of hormone. And it actually sensitizes our androgen, which is the male type hormones. So we have receptors for androgen hormones in our skin. And insulin sensitizes those receptors, so they're more sensitive to the androgen hormones that we have circulating. And when that happens, you get this overproliferation of keratin. Keratin is the protein that makes up our skin and hair. And when you've got this overproliferation, that sets the stage for the clogging and the inflammation and for that initial lesion to start forming. And this is a similar process that we see with hidradenitis suppurativa. That is considered an inflammatory acneiform type of skin condition that I also work with. So when we think about sugar and high glycemic carbohydrates, insulin is such a central point of this whole pathological process. And insulin is one of the, when I think about like biochemistry, and I'll try not to get too sciencey here, but I think of insulin as a springboard for so many other pro-inflammatory processes in the body. For example, insulin can increase arachidonic acid, which is like a fatty acid molecule that is like a precursor to what we call prostaglandins. Prostaglandins are inflammatory molecules that play a role in the healing response. They play a role even in uterine contractions, like during labor. They're supposed to be very short-lived, but when we have this out of control prostaglandin synthesis going on, for example, prostaglandin E2 specifically is linked with period pain, menstrual problems, and acne. And so that's another common theme I see. And the literature is pretty strong that women with acne are more likely to have PMS, painful periods, endometriosis. So I just think so strongly about this link between insulin, heart disease, and all of these other problems, including acne.
Yeah, that's another sort of emphasis on the fact that acne is actually the blessing because
Yes.
of it's terrible, but of the other things like heart disease, for example, I'd
Yes,
rather have the acne than the heart disease. So it's helping you get to the
exactly.
root sooner.
Yep.
So sugar, definitely a root cause. Sugar and dairy are the two foods
Oh,
that
yes.
have just a very large stack of research
Yeah.
that suggests there's a link between acne and those foods.
Yep.
But what are some of the other underlying root causes? You talked about digestive health and even endocrine health. So let's talk about some of the other root causes.
Yes. So toxicity is another problem. There are a lot of chemicals in our environment, and I do so much work with environmental medicine. In fact, I would say most of the time when people have what we call unexplained symptoms, more often than not, there's some underlying infection or toxicity going on. So, especially women, we love to use the makeup and the lotions and things like that. Those are endocrine disruptors. Those dysregulate our hormones. And so that's another piece. We touched on gut health, but going specifically deeper into gut health, so many people have what we call leaky gut or intestinal hyperpermeability. And that just means that the cells that line the small intestine have been damaged. They are spaced too far apart. And that is normally a protective barrier that keeps, food molecules and foreign substances and bacteria from getting into the bloodstream where it can trigger inflammation. So in people who've taken this is the trap, right? We have acne, so we take antibiotics, and then that sets the stage for imbalances in our gut bacteria, especially fungal yeast overgrowth, and we create a leaky gut. So that's why my acne got worse, because I created a worsened state of gut health by doing those things. But specifically, oftentimes when people have gut problems, they have something called small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And also, I see it coupled with small intestinal fungal overgrowth. And the reason that's a problem is because there are certain types of bacteria, they're called gram-negative, and that's just a class of bacteria. But what's unique about this class is that they have a toxin on their outer surface called LPS, or lipopolysaccharide. And that LPS toxin, it's also called endotoxin, that has been specifically linked with acne and endometriosis, all of those other things. When a person is in the hospital and they go septic, or you hear that they have sepsis, that basically means that the endotoxin from having a bacterial infection has, overtaken their body. So LPS is one of the most irritating substances known to the human body. And when we eat foods that are, super sugary, super starchy, even stress, we really encourage the growth of those unhealthy bacteria. They can also, these bacteria can also produce something called beta glucuronidase, and that is an enzyme that interferes with the body's detox mechanisms. So I have seen such a strong correlation with, candida or yeast overgrowth in the gut, and especially cystic acne. That yeast will produce a lot of toxins that are very hard on the liver. And so then your liver is so busy clearing out these toxins. One of them is called acetaldehyde, and it acts like alcohol. So again, your body's going to prioritize the most important crisis first. So it's using its resources to remove that acetaldehyde. Well, then you're not doing a very good job clearing your hormones and conjugating them and getting them out of the body and other things that need to be dealt with. So you kind of have this picture of self-intoxication or autotoxicity, and that stirs up systemic inflammation, and then you just have a whole cascade of symptoms. Rarely do my acne patients just have acne. And even if they don't perceive that they have gut trouble, they're like, yep, bowel movements are normal. I don't get any indigestion. When we do the testing and we really dive in, there is gut inflammation. So that's an important point. You can even have celiac disease and not have GI symptoms. So never let someone tell you that if you don't have gut symptoms and your gut is fine, that's a lie. And if you have any sort of skin issue, there's a problem in your gut.
They're so closely related, the gut and the skin. Happy gut, happy skin. Sad gut, sad skin.
Exactly.
So you mentioned mold earlier, that you had mold in your house. So let's talk a little bit about that. Yeah. I mean, you must have, if you had the buckets. And I think a lot of us have had mold in our houses or even apartments. I mean, I remember having like a pipe burst one winter. It was so cold, a pipe burst in the apartment, and then the wood floors were coming up, and so there was definitely water damage there. And you don't think anything of it, you're like, oh, it's not a big deal, but it is actually a big deal. So let's talk a little bit about mold.
Yes, I love this topic. Mold is everywhere in our environment. And I want to point out that not every mold is what we call toxigenic, meaning not every mold produces toxins that are specifically detrimental to human health. However, a lot of people, as you mentioned, do have mold in their homes. There can be moisture problems. There could be an appliance that has leaked, a previous flood, even windows that are not properly sealed. And what happens is that these molds produce toxins that are very detrimental to the human body. So I mentioned earlier lipopolysaccharide, or that bacterial toxin, as being one of the most irritating substances. Fungal toxins are the other thing that are really irritating to the human body. And so what we see typically is that there's been some sort of water damage or water exposure. And here's the thing: schools, offices, right? So it's not always, even our cars, it's not always the home. But what happens is these fungal toxins are very, very small. And so we easily can inhale them. They can easily penetrate through our skin. I actually had a patient who she was an acne patient. We got her skin clear, and then she came back with a random rash on her thigh. And it turns out that there was a water source in her house. So that was an interesting story. But these toxins get into our body, and there's a significant portion of the population where their immune system is genetically wired in such a way where the body doesn't really recognize what those toxins are or what to do about them. And so they stay stuck in our body, they get recirculated, and they just keep stirring inflammation, just circulating. They can move in and out of our cell membranes. And so we have to do very specific things clinically to trap those toxins in the body, where they can be excreted mostly through stool, but we also support other drainage pathways, the livers and the kidney. I should say the liver and the kidneys. I said that in reverse. But yeah, so mold is a significant exposure. And the thing to know about mold is that it can cause anything. There are certain types of infections or exposure that might have an affinity for certain body systems. Mold can pretty much cause anything from head to toe. Mold can cause acne, mold can cause hair loss. There's so much research on mold and infertility, fatigue, headaches. I would say the most common mold symptoms that I see that should especially give you pause and make you wonder are tingling sensations in the body. It's quite characteristic to have kind of like ice or pinprick sensations. That's quite characteristic of mold. Almost always I see headaches and fatigue. And the thing about mold is that it's what we call the great sensitizer. It primarily inflames the brain and the central nervous system, which is basically the whole body, because our autonomic nervous system controls the organs and, all of those processes. So when that is kind of on fire, we can become overly sensitive to any kind of stimuli. So I see mold patients where a slight touch hurts. Think about fibromyalgia, right? Is it fibromyalgia or is it mold? Think about things like light sensitivity, sensitivity to smells. Almost always, if someone has a strong chemical sensitivity, there's usually some sort of mold or what we just call biotoxin illness. Biotoxins are toxins that come from living organisms like mold. They can also come from infections like Lyme and co-infections, and that's a whole another rabbit hole. But my stance is that if you've got unexplained symptoms, if you've had a full workup, even if you've worked with a functional medicine doctor or a naturopathic doctor, and if you're still not better, you have to rule out mold.
This brings up a good question. A lot of us, we can smell mold, right? When you go somewhere and there's water damage, but you may not always smell mold. Is that right? Exactly.
Correct.
So that a lot of people don't realize, like, you may have water damage under your sink or maybe somewhere in your bathroom and not even realize it because it doesn't have that musty smell, but it could still
100%.
be causing issues.
Yes. And this is probably the worst part of my job, is trying to explain to patients that they need to have their homes inspected. Because you're right. It can be invisible. It can be in the most random places. There's not always that classic musty smell. I worked with one guy who, it was kind of a source of contention. And I'm like, okay, just do it. Just test your house. Finally, they found a tiny patch of black mold. I think it was under a floorboard in his basement. And there was like a little trickle. Certain types of mold will not grow without a water source, like the Stachybotrys black mold, but other types are more dry tolerant. And once they're established, they can just kind of be there. Yeah, so you're right. You don't always smell it. I had a lady recently, and the whole house was inspected. Finally, they found that there was a leak under her dishwasher. And it was actually a kitchen redo because mold is invasive, and the toxins that it produces permeate throughout the air. They can settle on surfaces and in surfaces. There are mold fragments, and the fragments and the toxins are not living. So you can't just like wipe them up or kill them. You have to remove those materials. So even in the Bible, mold is referenced, and the instructions are take down all the materials, take them to a faraway land, because that ancient wisdom, it's always known that it spreads, and it's not always something that you can just clean up. Sometimes you have to get rid of those materials.
Yeah. And I can see that being really frustrating because it's also invisible, right? In some sense, sometimes you can see it, but before you find it, you're like, you don't want to go through all the hassle of redoing your kitchen or redoing whatever you have to do, but it could make a big impact on your health.
I agree. And it's a big deal. And I won't spend too much time on mold because we'll be here all day, but mold is a serious toxin, especially, like aflatoxin B1, that's used as a bioweapon. Mycophenolic acid is another mold type of, mold metabolite that is toxic to the body. That is a profound immunosuppressant. And so there are implications here for cancer and all kinds of serious diseases. So it's not just about headaches or acne. I mean, this is a significant exposure that could be hurting your health, your family's health. Not to be scary, but you want to be aware of it.
And I think it's important to emphasize that these little ailments, the headaches, the little rash, the little thing here and there, they're usually the canary in the coal mine, so to speak, warning you of something bigger that may be brewing.
Yes, the blessing in disguise.
So, all right. So we've talked about some of the root causes and things that might be causing our acne, but now how do we start the healing process? What are some of the most important things that you recommend to your, to your patients with acne that can make a big improvement?
Definitely. Number one, you've got to stop the refined sugar, at least while you're actively trying to be healed. So candy, even grains that are very high glycemic that spike blood sugar quickly. So breads, crackers, rice, things like that. I actually really advocate for a grain-free diet initially, because that's going to automatically help to get insulin levels down. And it's also going to help reduce the risk that you're feeding those unhealthy gut bacteria. I used the specific carbohydrate diet during my own healing journey, and that was transformative for me, because I was not feeding the bad guys and I was allowing my gut a chance to rest. My other piece of advice would be to pay attention to the types of fats and oils you're consuming. That was a missing piece for me. I cut out the sugar and the grains, but I was still buying like pre-made salad dressing full of vegetable oil and canola oil. These are industrial seed oils where they use toxic solvents to extract the odors and get the oil out. So you really want to focus on healthy monounsaturated fats, things like avocado, fish oil, things like that. Make your own salad dressing with extra virgin olive oil, and get rid of the hydrogenated and partially hydrogenated oils. Nothing canola. This is one of the challenges with going to restaurants. Like 99% of them use canola oil, which is very inflammatory. And that is going to promote lots of inflammation in the body. And it's going to alter the composition of your sebum, the oil that you produce. Because whatever fat you eat is the raw material that your body has to make its own oil. So, and then we talked about dairy earlier. That's a huge problem for so many people. It's a very common allergy. Lactose aside, a lot of people are lactose intolerant, but the proteins in dairy are very large. They're difficult to digest, especially if your gut is already compromised. And dairy is something that really promotes high levels of insulin. It is high itself in insulin-like growth factor. That's something IGF-1, and it promotes the body's own production of insulin-like growth factor. And remember, we talked about how insulin has an effect on the skin and the hair follicles. It makes all of the factors involved with acne worse. So that would be my top advice. Those are things you could start today. Stop the dairy, stop the refined sugar, stop the vegetable oils. And that's low-hanging fruit. You don't even need a supplement to do those things.
Exactly. Yeah. And those are some of the things that even personally had such a big impact on my own skin. And I see in other people making those changes will have a huge impact. There might be some additional tweaks that you'll have to make as well, but I feel like those will at least get you a little bit of progress.
Absolutely.
And when it comes to detoxing, you mentioned earlier that was also an important part. Are there any special herbs or things, saunas, like what do you typically recommend in terms of detox? And is it different depending on which type of toxins maybe the person has?
Yes. Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, in general, I'm not really a fan of kind of the one-off like detoxes or cleanses. I know those are popular and they might have some value, but I believe that our body has inherent detoxification mechanisms built in. And so my goal is to support nutritionally what the body needs. So for example, in the liver, we've got phase 1 and phase 2. There's different processes that happen. So I'm looking at, hey, does this person have all of the nutrients required so the liver can do its job? That's step number 1. The other thing is we've got to stop putting the toxins in our body. It's like a bucket. And so while we're draining the water, AKA the toxins out, we want to stop putting new things in. And so that comes from paying attention to the type of cleaning products you use, the type of personal care products that you use, the foods that you choose to eat. That's probably step number 1. And that's kind of a blanket recommendation for everyone. I do really like sauna. Because a lot of the toxins, for example, mold toxins can be really stored deeply in the tissues, and the heat can help to mobilize that. I typically tell my patients to take something called a binder about 15 minutes before getting in the sauna. because toxins tend to circulate through different compartments of the body. They eventually make their way into the GI tract. They can get into the bile. And so if you take a binder supplement, something that might have like apple pectin, certain types of clay, chlorella, things like that, then you can take advantage of that toxin circulating through the gut, and you take a binder to kind of mop it up, and then you can excrete that through stool. So that's another option. I do use different types of binders depending on the toxin, but my favorite binder is a blend, and so it has a broad spectrum of action. I also really love modified citrus pectin. That has an affinity for heavy metals, and it does help to bind mold toxins. And it's kind of a miracle supplement, if I could say that, because modified citrus pectin isn't just a binder, it actually downregulates many inflammatory pathways. So it's anti-fibrotic, meaning like scarring. Think about things like fibroids and scars. It's so anti-inflammatory. It kind of just cleans the whole body. In terms of herbs, yes, Bicol skullcap is one of my favorite herbs. It does so many important functions. Dandelion root is really helpful, not the leaf, that's more of a diuretic, but I do use various botanicals, less so than the nutritional support and the lifestyle changes. I try not to add too many things if I don't have to. So for me, covering the lifestyle and the nutritional pieces are more gentle than immediately jumping into like an herb.
Yeah, and it makes sense. And the diet and the lifestyle, I feel like, are going to do the heavy lifting anyway.
Absolutely. Yeah, and
And
a lot, yes, go ahead.
go ahead. Sorry, go
Well,
ahead.
I was going to say, I know it's tempting. We all want the magic bullet. People like pills and potions and herbal things. But that, I think, can give the false sense of security that you're, getting the result without having to make the change. And you might see the benefit, but the goal is to really rebuild your health, not just use an herb. We have a whole hierarchy of how we approach things in naturopathic medicine.
Yeah, we all want the easy button, and it's a lot easier to take a pill than totally revamp the diet,
Yes.
but the pill can only get you so far.
Absolutely.
So is there anything else that we haven't talked about as it relates to acne that you just wish people knew?
Well, I think we've covered the most important pieces. I think what I want people to know is that, as Marie Forleo says, everything is figure outable. So I just want people to know that I've been there. I know how painful acne is. I had a very severe case of it, and everyone is different. Again, it might not be an overnight fix, but if you keep pursuing these basic truths that your body is self-healing and self-correcting, that if we remove what's getting in its way and we replenish what's missing, you will see results. You will heal.
I love that. And one other thing I'd love you to touch on,
Mhm.
a lot of times when people have acne, their self-esteem also plummets. They may feel more depressed and
Absolutely.
anxious. But what's interesting is that a lot of the same nutrient deficiencies that are implicated in acne are the same things that are implicated in depression.
Yes.
So could you maybe speak to that? Like, what are some of the important nutrients for both of these issues?
Yeah, I love that. It's so true. And it also, there's a gut skin axis and there's a gut brain skin axis and gut brain. So as a whole, they have found that people with acne have much lower levels of zinc, vitamin E, vitamin A, vitamin C, and all of these are nutritional cofactors for healthy neurotransmitter function, as well as skin health. And again, this goes back to the wisdom of the body, where your body will prioritize. So let me backpedal a little bit. If acne is a systemic inflammatory condition, that means you've got lots of what we call oxidative damage going on, lots of free radicals. So your body is going to use the available antioxidants that it has to put out the inflammation fire, right? And there's a higher demand on the body when it's in a state of inflammation. And so there's less of a reserve of those nutrients to go towards all of the essential functions. It's going to prioritize what's most important. And so as a result, maybe we need the antioxidant protection for our vascular and heart health. And so the neurotransmitters suffer and the skin suffers because those aren't as vital. So when I see nutrient deficiencies, we're either not eating enough, or the body is not absorbing it because of a compromised gut lining, or there's such a demand on the body that you're burning through it because there's some other inflammatory process going on. The other thing we see with anxiety and depression, those are inflammatory conditions. And they have also found that acne patients tend to have a lower level of glutathione. That's our self-made master antioxidant. And also lower levels of superoxide dismutase, which is another really important antioxidant enzyme. And I just think about, again, if you've got all of this systemic inflammation going on, there's a high demand on that glutathione, on that superoxide dismutase, and then the skin suffers. And that goes back to the mold piece too. I do see low antioxidants, low vitamin C, and low glutathione when people have been exposed to mold, because that's a crucial fire to be put out with those antioxidants. And so there's not enough left over to do all of the other functions in the body. But absolutely, the nutritional piece is huge with anxiety, depression. Lipopolysaccharide, again, can cause brain inflammation. Specifically, fungal toxins and bacterial toxins can cause our tryptophan pathway to go down a toxic pathway called quinolinic acid. So we're not making like healthy serotonin. We're turning our tryptophan into something called quinolinic acid, which is brain toxic. So there's just so many mechanisms here. And I know that was kind of a long explanation, but vitamin A, vitamin E, vitamin C is a big one, and zinc.
Well, I think that the most important takeaway is that when we start making these diet and lifestyle changes, it doesn't just improve one thing, it improves really all the things. And so
Absolutely.
that I think should give us a little bit more encouragement to make those changes.
Completely.
Well,
Yes.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bisco. This was so great. And
thank you for having me, Maria.
Of course. And for any of our listeners, if you want to learn more, first of all, I found Dr. Bisco on YouTube because I somehow ended up there and her videos were amazing. So go check out her YouTube. She's with Attune Medical. And also you could check out her website, attunemed.com. And I will put the links to all of those things in the show notes.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, thank you so much.
My pleasure, Maria. Have a great rest of your day.